Welcome to Primetime Mitch, everybody, and today is a quick review on 1972's Deliverance. Directed by John Boorman, this was the real first of its kind for the kind of exploitation redneck horror. Certainly the first of its kind for me, anyway. I'm just going to give a brief rundown of my thoughts on this movie. There will be spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie, I've attached links below where you can purchase this and see for yourself so you can agree or disagree with this review. So if you haven't seen it, pause it here, go see it, come back and then watch the rest of this review. If you have, here's my take on it. Got a very young Burt Reynolds in this movie and Jon Voight. They're the two main guys you get from the start. Ned Beatty and Ronny Cox make up the four. But these businessmen are kind of, I don't want to say they're really unpleasant. They're just kind of a bit stupid, naive, a real lack of awareness, I think. They are quite rude to the locals at the beginning, but in sort of an entitled way. They don't really understand where they are. They're only familiar with their own life. So I think it's more a naivety than it is obnoxious in any way. They're certainly not in the same league as the kind of characters we saw 9 years later in Southern Comfort, which is a great movie in its own right and one I wouldn't mind reviewing somewhere down the line. One of the better descendants from this particular movie. But they do have a real asshole attitude at the beginning. They are not aware of who they're speaking to or their surroundings. They're not reading the room whatsoever, and they rub up the locals the wrong way. Of course, we immediately are given that sensational, famous scene with the dueling banjos when Drew's attention is attracted to this strange young boy sat up on the porch swing and he is playing his banjo, and they start this incredible collaboration, improvised collaboration. And when that piece of music is at its absolute height, when it's reaching its crescendo, you can see that the boy is having the best time ever doing this. But also, you do get the feeling that he is lost in the music. His only joy is the music and is the sound that he creates from his banjo. I don't know. I mean, I played a little bit of guitar in my lifetime, acoustic mainly. And I know that when somebody plays along with you and you're able to play over the top of them, it does give you a bit of a buzz. And I get the feeling that that is a natural buzz that that kid has. But then obviously you see when Drew offers to shake his hand and offers to play another song, he turns away. He has no social skills, and there's probably a lot of fear in there as well. His only happiness came from the sounds. A lot of the beginning is simply just banter between the locals and the city boys, as they call them. They're mocking them for their lack of navigational skills, the fact that they can't adapt to their surroundings. It's light-hearted at the beginning. And when they get out onto the river, what I love about this movie is the sense of natural tension. You feel like something might not be okay, something might not be great, but there is absolute peace and tranquility throughout. You get that established first dueling banjos scene, and that gives you the score for the rest of the movie, because a lot of the time, and I always think with movies like this, silence is effective. The sound of the birds in the trees and sometimes the rushing water, that is all that accompanies you in that particular moment. And it puts you in the moment. You feel like you're surrounded by these chirping birds and this gentle breeze through the leaves and the trees. That's all that's needed. Too much tension music in these outback movies and these situations where there is isolation can really kill it, in my opinion, can take you out of the mood and make you realize you're still watching a movie. It worked in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is why I found that film so scary. And I think it works here. Very similar movies. Minimal score. It comes in at the right times and is subtle. I'm always one for focusing on that when it comes to this kind of film. So they get deeper into the sticks and they come across some very hostile mountain men. And it is a scary situation to be, because when I look at these situations that are played out, I almost think this has got to be a place which is practically lawless, certainly for the people inhabiting it. Again, with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'll go back. They furthered that 2 years down the line in a far more horrific fashion. But you just get that awful feeling that there is no one here to help you. No one can hear you. No one cares. We all know the scene that comes next with Jon Voight and Ned Beatty are in a practically nightmarish situation, which again is done in silence, no dramatic music over the top of what's going on. And Voight has to watch his colleague and friend assaulted by these mountain men, and it is a horrendous scene. It's very subtly done, and you know, even though these guys are not the greatest people in the world and they're very flawed, you do kind of feel for them, and you do kind of wish they'd get out of this situation, because I think a good movie puts you in that situation, in their shoes, and good character work does the same. And I think the acting throughout this is very good and very believable. A nice little point actually as well is how they show the slow death by the arrow. It's not just a boom, dead, falls to the floor. They really show how that would be painful and drawn out. You almost get a sense of satisfaction from it in a strange way, because you know what he was doing to them and what he was probably going to do to them. So it almost gives the audience a little satisfaction there in a bit of a twisted way. Maybe that's just a horror fan in me. They have a terrible time getting down through the rapids, and Burt Reynolds, aka Lewis, is the one that suffers the most. Another leg break. Why is it? Every movie I watch, it doesn't matter what era it's from, there's always got to be a bone breakage to upset me. They don't sensationalize it too much, however. It's hardly zoomed in on, and we don't see all the splinting procedure, so that's good at least. But it is interesting how they take out the most assured of the group. It makes it more interesting from there. There's not one person dictating all of this. Again, score points, great usage of the out of tune, completely out of key banjo as Jon Voight's character slips and falls down the mountainside into the water. It sort of gets the heart racing a little bit, but still keeps the same banjo tune, just in a very panicked, horrendously skewed way. What they don't really do here is play on Bobby's trauma. He is still able to suck it up and try and contribute to getting them out of there throughout of this. They don't make him like a gibbering wreck throughout, which I think is good, and it shows that a real strength of spirit, which I think with these sort of movies, the survival aspect is key. And if he had been sort of catatonic from that moment on, you kind of kill the character. So it's sort of, and it makes you like him more that he's continuing on despite what's happening to him. So I'm sort of glad they didn't play on that too much, because you do see that sometimes it almost wipes the character out early on, because all the positive traits, you don't get to see them. What they do tell you in this movie is the rapids are just as dangerous as everything that's going on the shores. Almost saying, you know, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. You know, if they stay in the water, they're likely to be in grave danger from the perilous rocks and the waterfalls. And if they get onto the shore, they're likely to be picked apart by savage, feral people. I was really sad to see Drew go. I think I loved him in the scene with the banjo and the guitar, but he was sort of the more likable of all of them. And even though I think maybe following the assault and the arrow attack that he might have been a little too moral when you look at what was being done to them, he was a nice character to have. So it was sad to see him go, although it's absolutely one of the most amazing visuals when they come across him and his arm is twisted around his head. That is a legit thing as well. Apparently Ronny Cox was able to do that, and it was left in because it looks so striking and so effective. I think that's one of a few creepy visuals. The one towards the end when you see the cars, the broken down cars at the river's edge, that sort of creeps me out a little bit. That reminds me of Wrong Turn, you know, with all the sort of abandoned vehicles from the people that have passed through. It sets your head off thinking, God, what's happened here before? You know, how many more have succumbed to this kind of thing? I don't have too many negatives about this movie. I think a lot of people criticised it for the way it portrayed those living in these areas. But I think what the movie does well is it shows really that it's only just a couple of very distant dwelling people that have behaved in that fashion. The locals at the beginning aren't really shown up to be terrible. They just mock them a little bit, and they don't really relate to these guys from the city that much. They're not very social, which is fine, you know. I mean, I can totally understand that. I have the privilege of Amy Horror's library, and she did her dissertation on this movie and exploitation films in general. She has this fantastic book here by Scott von Doviak. It makes a really great point in here that the river it almost snakes back in time, and the further they get out into that river, the more primitive the people become. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. I don't think it shows those people in a bad light. I think movies that have followed probably have, but certainly not Deliverance. Again, I mean, I do have some questions for it. It's like when I said that it's practically lawless out there, that it's a land where no one can help you and no one can hear you. But I guess in a way, when you see the sheriff at the end and the police dealing with what might potentially be murder, they do seem to care about that, because it's almost like they're looking after their own kind of thing. I've got a question that had they gone through with killing Ned and Bobby in the woods, would the authorities have cared then? Would they be dragging the river to find bodies then? I think there is that unfair feeling that they know they can't do anything, but they really want to do something to punish these guys. But I guess possibly they turn a blind eye to what goes on the further up the mountain or the further into the forest that they go. They sort of don't touch that area. So you almost get a free pass to do what you will with whoever enters your territory. That's the kind of feel I got from that. I'd be really surprised if the authorities even know what goes on in those mountains and those forests. It's almost like there's a point of no return.
Don't come back up here.
I quite like the finish. I quite like the music, distant and echoey, as if he's hearing it in his head all the time from then on. The guilt and the trauma just sort of is going to live with him forever. And I think that's what I took away. Ed is permanently scarred by that whole ordeal, and that banjo music will probably be there forever. Overall, I think Deliverance is a great movie. I saw it when I was quite a bit younger. I would say I was about 17 when I first saw Deliverance, and I watched it the other day for the first time in quite some time. It still hits. It still packs a bit of a punch. It's got quite an iconic status, particularly the dueling banjos scene is brilliantly done. There's some good acting, some good character work. You don't know too much about the characters. Maybe slightly more on each might have been preferable. Also, maybe more of a reason why they were there. I was sort of struggling with that at the beginning, as to understand why they were doing this. I got the general gist of it, but it seemed to be a bit of a shallow reason to go out into no man's land, effectively. But it's good. The dialogue's good. And the tension is good as well. And it is a pretty hellish, scary situation to be in. I think it is a horror. You could say survival drama, perhaps. But I think there's a lot of elements of horror in there. Certainly for me, it's one of my fears, is being stuck out in that kind of environment and having no way out. Which is why Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the scariest movie for me. So Deliverance set that up in some way. It also probably leads to things like Wrong Turn, Hills Have Eyes. Overall, a good experience. I did enjoy it. The review is on my letterbox if you want to see this in writing, and various other movies I've watched in the last few weeks. I do leave a written review for everything on Letterboxd. I always try to back up why I feel like I do about the movies that I review. And as ever, guys, I really appreciate you watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have some thoughts on this movie, please drop them in the comments below. And while you're at it, if you could hit that subscribe button, I would very much appreciate it. I like bringing my opinions to as many people as possible, and we've been doing great this year to build a small community on Primetime Mitch, and I really hope that that continues into Christmas and New Year. And I've got some good resolutions at the end of the year in order to take this channel forward. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, X. I often post things from my day on there as well, so if you find me personally interesting, drop me a follow on those platforms. But thank you for subscribing to Primetime Mitch. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for being part of my little growing brigade. Till next time, everybody, Mitch Cassidy over and out.